Hi, thanks for having me. Is this thing on? We've been playing with APIs at Stamen for quite a while. One of the things that we've discovered as we've kind of been iterating on this is that there's certainly a lot of value in using data and an API to do things like change your business model in the sense of being able to go from 4% profitable to 5% profitable, or sort of extend use cases and stuff like that. But there's another avenue that's about finding new kinds of questions, not necessarily just improving efficiency or improving access, but kind of holistic and qualitative shifting of your thinking and of finding new kinds of questions. And so that's what I'd like to talk about today, finding the unmarked trail in data. When we think of APIs, what we're really thinking about as a customer, essentially, or as a practitioner that uses APIs, of access to data. So whether it's whether there's always going to be some kind of data that's coming through, right? It seems obvious, but it's not about the technicalities of the API. It's just about accessing the data one way or the other. And the first time that we ever tried to do this, this is sort of a blast from the past. If you guys remember Flickr tag clouds when they were sort of a big deal. What we did was to notice that these were the most popular tags on Flickr. What we noticed was that a good 40% of them referred to geography. And this is way before any kind of like putting images on maps or Instagram or anything like that. But noticing this, what we found was that there was enough metadata on Flickr's images that we could start to think about putting them on maps with some degree of accuracy. So we read through the images on Flickr, cross-referenced those against a geographic database, and we're able to come up with these kinds of things. This is a map of the Flickr photos referring to sunsets. So kind of nice, but what we also soon discovered as we were kind of browsing through was some other interesting patterns. This is a map of Route 66 on Flickr. Nobody had actually put these on a map, but simply by tagging the photos with Route 66 and the location, of the city of where it was, we're able to build up essentially a giant data visualization experiment that nobody knew that they were participating in. And this idea that these things kind of emerged out of the data without us looking for them was a kind of early place where we had a lot of fun. And to kind of continue the kind of early theme of this. This was a project for Dig Labs. It was sort of I don't know if everybody remembers Dig, but it was a kind of pre-Facebook. You could like things. This is called Dig Labs Swarm. What you're seeing here is the visualization is catching the launch of Apple's iPhone. Each one of these yellow circles is a digger, and then that story is a circle. And as people dig the story, it comes out. And starts to emerge, and then these stories are all being dug by the same people, so they kind of cluster together. So the fun part here, and this was before Dig had an API. The process was look at Dig's data, see what could be found that was interesting in it, and then build an API against that, and then build visualizations on top of it. So this kind of process of building and designing at the same time. The themes that came out of this was we could use APIs to catch change as it happens. The reason for that is because the world is going to be more interesting than you are. If you build a visualization that's going to catch the interesting things, they'll pop out at you. They'll be visually apparent, and you'll see them happen. As I was talking with my studio before I came over to this conference, I was asking some of the more technical guys there, if I'm going to talk to a business audience about how they should construct their APIs, what should I tell them? So we started having these conversations about providing consistent results, APIs that do something versus produce versus providing data, sort of the read-write stuff that we were talking about. We started talking about things like it returning JSON and name value pairs and getting into the sort of intricacies of being able to extend things. We talked about APIs that other people can use if they want. That's super important. We talked about being able to use command lines in a really expressive way. And then Seth said something that really changed how I was thinking about APIs and what I wanted to talk about with you all. And he said that the best APIs are like novels. He was talking about APIs being expressive, that an API where you can't actually imagine that anybody had actually written it or kind of imagine that a person had actually been trying to communicate something to you was a significantly less satisfying API than one that was just about sort of turning a key. And then we started to have another conversation, like, does the API have any soul, right? Is there something behind it? Is there some intention? What's going to be interesting? It's not just about the API and you consume it all and then suddenly you start pumping things out, but what are the pieces of it that I can pull on and find, and what are the pieces of it that I can ignore? We talked about whether the API can support new actions, new interactions, and new kinds of interactions, so that it's not just about reiterating or getting efficient, but is it the kind of thing that can enable new behaviors and some new interactions? And can I explore with it, or is it something that I can just browse through? Is it something where I can learn new things, explore, and investigate? And then in the end, what we've started to realize was that there's a lot to argue about here. The conversation that we were having was less about a kind of engineering, hacky, kind of grease monkey conversation. It almost sounded like we were a couple theater critics bantering back and forth. This idea that, and I think the fun part for me is that APIs have been around long enough that they're maturing into this sort of sense of a medium, that it's not just a question of efficiency and rigor, but it can also enable a new kind of conversation. So I want to show a couple projects that are about a use of data that's, again, not just about efficiency, but about discovering new kinds of things. And one of those is a project we were asked to do by Nasdaq. We were exploring the market dynamics of what the stock market looks like and trying to come up with some ways of looking at stock market data that weren't just about the line going up and to the left or the sort of market spread. So I want to take you through that. What we're doing here is visualizing a minute worth of stock trading data on Nasdaq. Time goes this way. So this is one part of the minute, and that's part of another minute. It's about a minute long. Each one of the circles is a stock trade. So that's a stock trade, that's a stock trade. These are little stock trades down here. The size of the circle is the size of the trade, right? So there's more stocks being traded here than there are here, and there's sort of a middle range here. The color in this instance is the stock that's being traded, and the vertical axis here is price. So we have cheap ones down here and expensive ones up here. So what we're seeing here is these are two shares, the two buys of the same stock in the same amount at the same value over time. And the same thing here. So we've got these these are trades happening. This is a very regular beat of a trade down here, something that's pretty inexpensive and being traded regularly. And then down here we've got, this is Nasdaq's pinger. This is basically, it's trading one stock at a very cheap price, and it's just doing it regularly, and they're doing that to make sure that the market is functioning properly, because sometimes it doesn't. And that's one way to tell. So again, they're colored by stock, right? So when you shift the color values, though, and you color them by trader, you get a really different picture. So just to go back for contrast, that's by stock, a lot of variation, and that's by trader. This green color is Knight Securities. These are the guys that introduced beta software into the market and had that whole big market collapse in about 20 seconds. Something like $4 billion evaporated because they introduced some rogue software. So here you've got, this is Knight, a whole different picture emerges, and we'll talk about the blue in a little bit, but there's Nasdaq down again at the bottom. Here's another window, a minute worth of trading. Here's somebody who's trading, and then quickly stops. Here's a couple regular market makers, and then a whole lot of kind of chaos in the middle. And there's Nasdaq again. If we look at it by trader, again, totally dominated by our friends at Knight. They have a very distinctive pattern to how you can, as you start to look at this stuff, you can sort of recognize their behavior without having to look at the colors. Another thing that this shows is, well, as you look through this, you start to see lots of different kinds of patterns, and this is one that leaps out at you when you start to pay attention to this. What we've got here is a whole lot of very small trades starting. This is an obvious grouping, right? This is real activity. You don't see it over here, and you don't see it over here. You've got a line where the trading starts, and it fizzes out. There's a high value and a low value to it, and they're all the same size, and they're all different stocks, sort of a mishmash, and it's a color pattern that emerges. If you color this by trader, we see this is a single actor. This, I believe, is Bear Stearns, Morgan Stanley, one of the big ones. This is a robot shaking the stock market. to get the pennies loose. And again, our friends at night, just continuously. Same kind of thing over here. We've got the color equals stock, right? So here's something that looks like a pattern, but it's very small, and we can't really tell what's going on. There again, another robot. So for us, the point here is to not go in with a lot of kind of preconceptions about what you're going to find. That using visuals to look through data is a way to garner. We didn't go in here looking for robots; they just emerged. So I want to take you through the opening bell of Nasdaq in this view, and what the stock market looks like under this kind of circumstance. So here we've got the opening. The opening hasn't happened yet. This is about 8:30 in the morning. We've got a couple robots lurking in the darkness, making their plays. Nasdaq is continuously pinging. We've got a little burst of activity right in here. And then, kind of remarkably, about 5 minutes before the market opens, we get this just insane hash of tiny little trades as all the robots. So essentially, like everybody puts in these tiny. You'll see that there's no large dots in here, right? There's just little trades happening, little market sketches, kind of checking things out. You see this line down here. If you were to hold a ruler up to it, this line here matches it exactly. This is somebody pinging the low end of the market and the high end of the market simultaneously. That stops rather abruptly right here at an arbitrary marker. This crazy thing happens here as close as we can determine. This is, so you can see this is colored by stock. So these are two stocks being traded at incrementally higher values by a collusion of market traders, and they're essentially driving the stock price through the roof in very tiny amounts. This is some kind of weird robot war that we don't really understand. Getting on a little closer, we get to the opening of the market. This is 9 a.m. And these are all the giant trades that just get sort of lumped in here. There's this interesting kind of fall off that happens. We see this here, which is this totally bizarre thing. This is Apple and this is Google. So we've got one large trade, and then we've got this simultaneous kind of bifurcation of like offers being put at high prices and low prices. That's what that is there. And the same thing here, this is Google. We got this here, obviously a robot. Another robot here. So this kind of stuff, I need to, it's a good thing that I'm at a business conference. Maybe somebody can explain this to me, because this thing where someone is pinging, this is a line of trades, many different stocks, all being offered at the same amount. So let's call this 50 cents, right? Someone's saying, I want to trade this stock at 50 cents, this stock at 50 cents, this stock at 50 cents, all in rapid succession. You got to remember this is a minute, right? So this line represents just a robot just going, just gnawing at the stock market. Then we settle into our normal pattern. That's night again. And about 5 minutes in, we get our first serious robot action right there. So again, the point here was not to build a robot catcher. The point was to say, what kinds of things can we find when we look at the market? What kind of questions can we ask? What kinds of patterns can we find so that I can ask a stock expert, what's that? Or what's that? This actually talked to a stockbroker and asked them about how that works. So a way of kind of sidestepping the traditional kind of like, well, let's make it a little more, couple more percentage points accurate here, more accurate here, a couple more percentage points accurate here, and let's try and look at it in a new way and come up with new kinds of questions. This part is a bit less developed. If it looks a little bit less developed than the others, it's because it is. We're currently working on this project now. A lot of what we get asked to do is to investigate APIs for our clients. We're currently working with Facebook doing this right now, is to investigate the kind of contours of their API and see what interesting things can come out the other side. And one of the projects that we're working on now is not for Foursquare, but it's for a foundation that's interested in the intersection of social media and open spaces in California. And so we're doing a bunch of investigations to try and see how do people use parks, how do people use Twitter in parks, how do people use Facebook in parks, how do people use Foursquare in parks. And so this is this is really super early investigation, but it provided a nice example of the kind of qualitative change and aggregation that I'm thinking about. So what we've got here, if you recognize the contour of San Francisco, all these little gray lines are all the open spaces in California. It's from a database called CPAD. And then all of the circles are Foursquare venues inside of those parks. So here's Golden Gate Park. There's a bunch of venues in it. Here's the Presidio, a bunch of venues in it. Alcatraz. The blue lines are representations of what the what the Foursquare API lets you query for. You can get for any given location the 5 locations that people are most likely to go to after they go there. Right. So I'm here at the St. Regis. Somebody can take a look at Foursquare. The places that you might go to after this are the Four Seasons or Golden Gate Park. So the blue lines are representations of where people go after they go to a park. Right? So, or after they check into one of those places. And some of these don't have results, and some of them are less popular than others. But that's the general idea. What we're trying to look at is how do people use parks? Where do they go first before they get in there, and where do they go afterwards? And what can we say about the different parks having this information? So you wind up with results like this. Here's the Presidio. And there's a bunch of stuff that's happening inside the Presidio and a bunch of stuff that's happening outside the Presidio. What you can tell is the place that people go to most after they go to the Presidio is Golden Gate Bridge, right? So that's stuck in there. And people come to the Golden Gate Bridge from all over the place. But a lot of times when people are inside the Presidio, they're going to, there's a little nexus here. They also wind up at the overlook on the outside of the bridge, sorry, on the south side of the gate. But there's a fair amount of sort of inter-check-in and extra check-in. Presidio, obviously a pretty rich and complex place. When you look closely down at the zoo, so here's the ocean, and then this is sort of the southwest corner of the city. The zoo is a fundamentally different profile. What we noticed about the zoo was that everybody that's checking in at the zoo is also then checking in next at other places inside the zoo, right? They're not checking in there's a couple, they're checking in at Alcatraz, whatever, but there's almost no traffic here, and there's a tiny little bit down here. But what this means is that people are checking in at the monkey house, they're checking in at the viper pit, they're checking in at the giraffe stand, right? They're checking in at at various locations in here. And so what that means to us is that people think about this park as a narrative place. When they think about their experience of this open space in this park, they're thinking about a narrative of going to different places inside of it, and that's a very different use case than some of the others. Well, we'll just go back to here. What this means is that they're checking in, at different places inside of here, and they're using multiple locations in that park to craft their social media experience. The same is true when you look out here in the East Bay at Mount Diablo, where the fires just got put out, I guess. I know from my Instagram feeds and my Facebook that these are all different trailheads inside of the Mount Diablo park, right? So when people go to Mount Diablo, they check in at different trailheads, they check in over here, they check in over there. They've got an experience of this open space that's very much about kind of multiple locations inside of it. When you look at Angel Island, by contrast, right up here, there's a ton of Foursquare venues inside of Angel Island, but people are only really checking into these. And they're also checking in mostly into Alcatraz next, and then I think this is Tiburon. So what that says to us about this is that Angel Island is a place where people think of, at least as far as their social media consumption goes, as a place to check in and then as a place to leave from, right? It's a destination that's a very sort of brief and discrete location, as opposed to some of these other ones where there's a ton of activity that's happening inside of them, and again, a ton of activity that's happening inside of them. Now, this is the point that I'm trying to make here is that this is not the question that we were seeking to ask when we did the visualization. It was simply a representation of what the data says using an API, and then the questions fall out the other side. And what we're trying to get across is this idea of that mapping and visualizing APIs are partially about their answer-making interfaces, but they're also question-making interfaces. They're interfaces to come up with new kinds of questions if you're open to them. So for example, what it tells you is not just there are different kinds of parks, because that's obvious, but this is what that difference is as far as the specific social media landscape goes. It's not just about them being different, but it's about gaining clarity on something that you didn't necessarily have clarity on before. It's about a quantitative analysis of a problem and not just a qualitative analysis. As I was saying before, it's the difference between 4% or 5% and WTF is going on here. It's a way of sort of sidestepping the kind of small increments and getting big in your thinking and coming up with new kinds of questions. I want to close with, I'm supposed to, oh, you're waving at me, sorry. I want to close with just a brief description of how this kind of work gets done in contrast to the traditional waterfall model, where you've got a solution down here and a problem up there and time's going this way. You go, there's step one, you define essentially what's happening, you define the problem, and then you generate a document, you move on to a next phase, you move on to a next phase, you move on to a next phase, and then you're finished. The kind of problem solving that I'm talking about, this is a diagram of learning, where you start off really trying very hard to come up with a solution. You realize you've made a terrible mistake. You go back up, you zip up here, you restate your assumptions, go back down, and then essentially the project ends when you run out of resources and when you've made enough pictures. Thanks for listening.